outside? Should I run and hide? How do I take my company worldwide? Do you love the law? Did you watch Hee-Haw? What's the weirdest thing that you ever saw? What's it like in court? Favorite sport? Can you help with my book report? Is my hair too long? Am I right or wrong? And do you mind if I sing along to anything? Ask Alan anything in the world.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Ask Alan, the podcast. I'm Alan Crone, CEO of the Crone Law Firm, and we appreciate you joining us today. With me this week is Coletta, who's the president of the Memphis River Parks Partnership, or the partnership as they call it for short. She is the person in charge of redeveloping and reimagining our downtown riverfront. And she's got a lot going on. We're going to find out a little bit about her and a lot about the riverfront. Carol, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for the invitation, Alan.
All right, now I got to take care of a little personal business. Today is, and this will date the show a little bit, but today is my 31st wedding anniversary. How do you like that?
Wow.
Somebody's been married to me for 31 years, and she doesn't look nearly as bad. She looks great. And I told her this morning, I said, you know, you look fabulous for somebody who's been married to me for 31 years. And she agreed with me. So,
you know, I can tell though the two of you have had a great time.
We have had a good time. We got 3 kids, as you know, and we've had a good run. Hopefully, she says, no, it's not even half over yet. I said, okay, I'll take your word for that. So we had fun this morning. Well, Carol, again, as I said, you've been in your current job. I was going to say a little over a year, but it's longer than that, isn't it?
2 years.
2 years. Time goes fast when you're having fun.
Absolutely.
Well, tell us a little bit. You're a native Memphian.
I am. You know, someone just wrote on one of the blogs somewhere that somebody should give me a one-way ticket on Amtrak to go back where I came from. And I thought, well, actually I can ride a bike about 18 minutes from here. And I'm where I came from, South Memphis, Longview Heights. And I still have a real, I have such a love for South Memphis. I don't know, South Memphis. I guess it's the part of Memphis you grew up in, you know, it's always in your heart. And so I like to say I've never lived north of Union Avenue, which means I've never lived outside of what once was South Memphis.
That's right.
Because
a lot of people
know it was South Memphis and Memphis, and then they joined at Union Avenue.
A lot of people think that was something from the Civil War, but it was because of the union of the two cities.
That's my understanding. So anyway, I'm a South Memphis girl and have remained there ever since.
So you went to Southside High?
No, I didn't. That's interesting. I went through Longview Elementary, Longview Junior at the time. They used to call it junior high school. And then my family moved away from Longview Heights. I lived in Whitehaven for maybe 5 years, and then had to get back to the city as, you know, I wanted to get out of the burbs. But I went to Hillcrest, graduated from Hillcrest High School.
Okay. All right. Very good. And then what did you do after Hillcrest High School?
Oh my gosh. Well, let's see. Alan, I have an interesting life story. I had my daughter very young. And so I started to Memphis State at the time with a 3-week-old and blew through college as fast as I could. I was trying to work and juggle momhood and college, and became a senior and had to drop out. Because I had to really work, you know, and feed us, and was out for 10 years while I was working. Those were in the days when you could get a good job without a college degree. But fortunately, 10 years later, I was able to go back, change my major. I'd finished one, but then I decided I'd get a second one and finish. So I was glad of that. University of Memphis, I often say, kind of saved my life. And I love the university. It's so important to so many of us who are first-gen college students. And a lot of people are in this situation that I was in for a long time. They have some college, but no degree. And that's not, especially today when there's so few jobs that pay well without a college degree. It's something that everybody, it's just, unfortunately, I think it's become a real, it's a convenient way for employers to weed people, to evaluate. It's just kind of a first cut that a lot of employers make. And I think about it, if that had been the case, when I was starting out, Alan, I don't know what my life trajectory would have been. I was really fortunate because I got a chance to work with some great companies. I worked with Holiday Inns when Kimmons was still there, for the only female executive vice president, or senior vice president, I guess. And then I got a chance to work at City Hall. I started volunteering downtown during the days when people were beginning to think about the rejuvenation of downtown, the early 70s. Of course, downtown had been taking a hit for a long time. And then 68, the tragic year, when Dr. King was assassinated, that was just, and the riots occurred, as we call them. Then, that accelerated the movement out of downtown. And so in the early 70s, I was actually working, began in City Hall under Wythe Chandler's administration in the CAO's office, working on some of the earliest downtown projects. And to find myself back here again, this many years later, working in the same territory, it feels like I've come full circle. But it was such an incredible opportunity to work inside City Hall and, be part of that. And I think that's one reason I so respect and admire public servants, because, they are vilified. They have a hard job. They're not particularly well compensated. It's 24/7. And as you know, because you did it, it's just, but the work they do is so fundamental to all of our lives. So anyway, it was fun to be there. That was a real gift.
That's a great story, but that's a great narrative that you have. And I always really enjoy finding out how people got where they are, because I think a lot of people assume that somehow if you get to a position like yours, that you're just kind of dropped into it and, just kind of fell back into it. But there's a continuum that gets you there. And yours started with what a lot of people in this town have to do, is work their way through college and take a break and then come back to it when you can.
Well, what's also interesting is I think a lot of young people today, those on the college track, it's like they overthink it, right? They also think you've planned for this. In a lot of ways, I didn't plan for any of this. I mean, my life only makes sense in the rearview mirror. Like it all is of a piece, but I'm thrilled with what I'm doing. I've had so many opportunities, but I didn't plan to work for the Knight Foundation in Miami or the Kresge Foundation or be head of CEOs for cities. I just sort of took every little opportunity that came my way. And the only thing that makes sense, kind of the thread that runs through all of it, I think, is my real passion for cities and success. How do cities become successful, right? Why is one city successful and another one is not? How do they thrive? That's the obsession I've had since I was actually a little kid. Do you know that I've got to tell you this one story, because this is a good story.
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
When I was in, I think, high school, I wrote Henry Loeb a letter, Henry Loeb, the mayor, and told him what he should do with Beale Street. Now, I don't know where I got the audacity to do that, but he actually passed the letter to Orel Ledbetter, who was head of the MHA,
Yep.
Memphis Housing Authority, who wrote me back. And it's so funny. That's still a big event for me, that someone that I could express an opinion to someone high up in the city and they would actually listen to me and respond. So anyway, it's funny. I've had this passion about, how do you take your assets that are undervalued and make them, turn them into something that is newly that is seen in a new light. And I think that for me, that's why Memphis is like the juiciest strategic challenge of maybe any city in America, because we're a majority Black city in a majority Black county in a metro area that is where the largest demographic is African American. I think we know that because of where we are in America, right? Racism and just how we view Blackness in America, we have undervalued it. And so Memphis, therefore, is undervalued. And I think that's really interesting. It's like, okay, if you just kind of cut away all the morality and the ethics and the rightness, the wrongness of that, then you say, well, okay, so those are the circumstances I find myself, those are the cards I'm dealt. What do I do with that? How do I flip that? And to me, that's like, if you want to think about all the challenges in cities, that one's really interesting. And it's not a challenge that is just Memphis trying to crack, because you're trying to crack it in a lot of different places. So I see that as an enormous opportunity for Memphis.
Well, let me ask you this. Well, first of all, what was young Carol's solution to Beale Street?
Actually, you know what? You're going to laugh at this. It's not far off from what was done on Beale Street. I mean, because you remember we'd redone all the streets, and we had all this crazy street thing there, and Beale Street, they weren't sure whether to tear it down and blow it up and try to do something new with it. And it was very much one of you need to hang on to the buildings, restore them, and bring entertainment life to the buildings. And there were a couple of ways you could have done that, right? You could have done it all with TGI Fridays back in the day, or you could do it with these independent businesses with, local music and so forth. And I'm so glad we took the second path. It hasn't been easy, but, and there's been lots of controversy over the years, but it was the right path to take, for sure.
All right, I'm going to ask you kind of a strange question. Why cities to be passionate about? There are lots of things to be passionate about. Some people are passionate about sports, decide to make that their life's work. Some people are passionate about medicine or the law or aviation. What was it about cities in particular that drew your fascination initially and then became a career for you?
Well, every Saturday when I was in, 7th, 8th grade, I would come down, I would get on the 13 Lauderdale bus by myself. You could do that in those days. And I came downtown on Saturday. There would be a fashion show, and there would be music and all kinds of things going on Saturdays. And I remember walking down Beale Street, and, it was so weird and compelling to me. I just fell in love. I also had this view from afar of Greenwich Village, all about the folk music scene. It sounds so crazy, but it was that and experiencing downtown at a young age. I remember even sitting on the riverfront. In fact, it's my first memory of the riverfront, sitting and watching the Cotton Carnival barge come in. And I mean, my family, let me just say, was like, we weren't in any secret societies. We would never aspire to be in a secret society. But it was fascinating being an observer, right? With that barge coming in and all lit up, and the fireworks and the people getting off and everything glittering and sparkling. And it was just like magical. I've always thought cities were magical. And it's funny, if you see my vacation photos, all vacation photos are like of cities, like, and things about cities. I was telling the staff just earlier, we were working on redoing a piece of the riverfront. And I was saying, well, I have many pictures of public restrooms. in parks. And it's like, they said, you do? And I said, yes, I do. I photographed those, and for a reason. So I'm kind of obsessed with cities and the details. You know what? It's the mix of people that I love. I mean, it's a miracle. Think about it. It's a miracle that 99% of the time, this crazy, diverse, place called a city, people get along. They actually kind of follow the rules. They don't bump into each other. They drive their cars and don't run into each other. They don't say nasty things. They say hello. I go down to the riverfront every afternoon with my dog, and people, hey, how are you? Oh, good. How are you? Oh, let me touch your dog. Can I touch your dog? People are so sweet. And the fact that it works 99% of the time is kind of a miracle. I love that.
That's true. That's true. That's a great way to think about it. I have a buddy of mine, he used to be law partners with Miles Mason, who's been on this show. He tells a great story about being in a hotel in Manhattan, sitting on a balcony, watching the traffic. And he said, I probably was watching it for an hour and a half, just watching the traffic. And he said, I finally decided that it works because it can. There's no reason why Manhattan traffic should work, but it does. And he says, the only way it works because it can, and it's somewhat of a miracle. So when you were telling that, I kind of thought of that comment of his. Cities really are kind of a wondrous thing, and how some cities spring up for a purpose, like Memphis springs up because of the commerce on the river, and is big, cotton, wood, shipping, and then, it declines because technology changes, and then we get FedEx, and so now we have another reason to be, and the ebb and flow of that really is interesting.
Well, and there's a great book called Triumph of the City, and one of the points made there is that you're always going to have economic changes, right? And things will, as you say, ebb and flow. And the success of cities long term is their ability to adapt. And that's one of the reasons that you never want to get so parochial. And I think this is this is a real danger of mid-sized cities like Memphis, is that you get so parochial that you think we're the only ones who know how to do this, or you get stuck that this is the only thing that will work. And you don't see that changes are coming and that you need to adapt and change. I was thinking, there was a story in the Sunday New York Times, Alan, I think I sent this to you maybe, on Venice.
On Venice, you
on
sure
Venice.
did.
And it was talking about Venice as a monoculture, that it's become far too dependent on one industry, in the case of Venice, tourism, and that it has not, but Venice can be a beautiful, wonderful place to live. And there are reasons that colleges and universities and other kinds of big foundations, et cetera, should want to be in Venice, but they have to accept that the tourism business that Venice has so depended on has also made it a monoculture, and therefore put it at risk during times like these, when the tourism industry has collapsed. And so that that ability to adapt and to have enough variety in one's economy. There are going to be things that you're exceptionally good at doing, and you need to build on those. But I think you also have to recognize that diversity in the economy will help you through those economic, upheavals and certainly we're going through one now.
Well, let me switch gears a little bit on you. This period of time that we're talking about in your life, from the time that you started Memphis State to the time that you graduated working downtown, can you recall a figure from that time that was really important to you from a mentor standpoint, or just a career standpoint? Who stands out as somebody that really was pivotal in your life?
Well, I can think, a number of people, but, Ron Terry, who was chairman of First Tennessee, now First Horizon Bank, was very pivotal. because I went to First Tennessee, or in some ways to sort of flee the downtown job. And one thing, and the thing about Ron that was so pivotal, Alan, is that I would go into his office. He would have given me an assignment. I would go into his office and I would think, okay, I got this. I've got the solution. Here it is. And every time I walked out of his office, he would make me see that whatever I was proposing, there was a larger context. And I would go out of his office and think, oh, I now understand that as something bigger. And so he really stretched the boundaries for me, and always made me see sort of the surrounding context. And that was huge for me. And I ran the Memphis Jobs Conference for him when he chaired it for a couple of years. And that was a pivotal moment as well. The other one was not nearly as direct or personal, but I'll just give you one other story. I used to do a radio show called Smart City, and it was nationally syndicated on public radio. And I interviewed Mayor Daley, Richard Daley, in Chicago, and he sent me after the interview, he sent me a book, and I sent him a note to thank him for the book. And then he had his team call me and say, "Are you planning to come to the CEOs for Cities meeting in Chicago?" And I said, "Well, no, I hadn't been invited, but you tell Mayor Daley if he wants me there next time, invite me, I'll come." And again, I don't know why I was so audacious, but I was. And I got a call back in a couple of days saying, "Mayor Daley would like to see you. Are you coming to Chicago anytime soon?" And I said, I do have a trip to Chicago soon. But, I'm really flexible on the dates. Sure, I'd like to visit. When is he available? So that was the pathway to my getting to run CEOs for Cities when it moved from Boston to Chicago, which was a national network of urban leaders. And we had, I spent a lot of money there on research, and it was just a phenomenal opportunity. He lived in Chicago for 8 years. But Mayor Daley, I've remained a friend of his, but he is just watching him work. I mean, he's funny. He's not terribly articulate, but some of the speeches he gave and some of the ways that he worked in Chicago, I think were very instructive and very inspiring. He had the greatest way of including immigrants in the Chicago story. And anyway, those are two people who stand out for me.
Wow. Now, was this Mayor Daley? Was this the old man, or is this the more recent Mayor Daley?
The more recent Mayor Daley.
Okay. Yeah. This wasn't Democrat National Convention 1968. No. Send in the troops, Mayor Daley.
No, but the son. I mean, let's say the son was right there with him and has his own share of mistakes to account for. But I also think, and I'm not making excuses for that, and don't want to address it, but I do think that anyone in the arena is going to make mistakes. And I would like to see us get to a point we could accept more nuance and more gray in how we judge each other, and just at least take a breath. Social media has been very destructive in that way. And,
it's terrible. It's terrible.
I mean, there are good things about it. There are wonderful things about it. That people from my childhood I can keep in touch with that I wouldn't be otherwise. So yes, good. But just the vitriol and I don't know. It just gets really tiresome. Painting with a really broad brush. And do we need to make change? And do all of us need to atone for things? Absolutely. But we got to give people a little space to make mistakes. That we're human. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Well, those are the two fascinating folks. I never met Mayor Daley, but I think I met Mr. Carey very early in my career, very late in his career. I think he was retired by that point, I think. but he's one of the legendary figures of Memphis business.
Oh yeah, he's just a great guy.
All right, so let's talk about the riverfront now. For full disclosure to everybody, I was chairman of the Mayor's Riverfront Task Force, and you served on that. And together we worked on a concept that helped guide the riverfront. And during that process, you became the president of the partnership. And I guess talk a little bit about, you mentioned your earliest memories on the riverfront. Again, what's your elevator pitch on why riverfronts are important, and particularly the Memphis riverfront?
Ooh, that's a good question, the elevator pitch. The riverfront is the most visible real estate in Memphis. Its condition telegraphs who we are and who we want to be as a city, like it or not. We can't hide it. It's there. And so we need to get the riverfront right, and we are a city that can leave no asset behind in terms of people or places. And this is a place that has been under-imagined for many years. That's not unusual in cities, but many cities on waterfronts over the last 15, 20 years have learned to reclaim their waterfronts. That's always been back of house for us, but no more. Now it's really a people place, and we're a little slow in getting started on our riverfront in earnest. But I don't think that's a terrible thing, Alan, because I think it gives us a chance to learn from the mistakes of others. It actually gives us a chance even to learn from our own mistakes. I was describing to a group of people this morning that you look at a place like Mud Island, which I'm looking at out my window, which is such a remarkable peninsula out in the middle of the Mississippi River. But when we planned Mud Island in the early 70s, late 70s and opened it in 1982, the program was very rigid. You wouldn't build a rigid program. You wouldn't build an asset today, or you shouldn't, with a rigid program. That program needs to be thought of in 100-year cycles, right? And we don't know a COVID-19 is coming. We don't know what's coming next and how we will want to use this land. We just know it needs to be sustainable, durable, and flexible so that people can make it and reshape it over, as conditions change. And so making just a beautiful platform for lots of different things to happen over long periods of time is what we're trying to do now.
Right. And, I think that Memphis Riverfront is kind of a paradox in a lot of ways. I've seen a bunch of riverfronts. You organized a trip for some of us to go and look at a bunch of riverfronts. I've gone to a bunch of riverfronts. I kind of grew up in St. Louis a little bit. I went to boarding school up there, so I know the St. Louis riverfront. And in a lot of ways, there are a lot of cities that would trade straight up with Memphis right now on our riverfront as it exists. But there's also so much potential. That's kind of the paradox that I see.
Yeah, there is so much potential. The other thing that I think about our riverfront, I mean, in addition to being the front door to the city and the gateway to the state and a tourist attraction, all those things. The interesting thing about Memphis and the riverfront is that, if you look at the crescent of neighborhoods around downtown, the zip codes around downtown, they are persistently low income and have been for years. And I believe if we're smart, the riverfront can do all the things it needs to do in terms of economic impact and for downtown and tourism and so forth. Yes. But it can also serve people in those neighborhoods. And if we're really smart, and you and I have talked about this, like MLK Park, we can also attach the narrative of the riverfront to some of those neighborhoods that have been disinvested for years. You can't start with a disinvested neighborhood and believe you're going to bring it back or get the flywheel going of investment just by putting low-income housing, right? I mean, and we need that. We need to house people in places they can afford. Don't misunderstand me. But everybody, honestly, Alan, everybody wants a Starbucks in their neighborhood. I mean, they poor people want the same thing that, wealthier people want in their neighborhoods. They want to have nice neighborhoods. They want to have nice amenities. So if we can sort of get the riverfront thought of as an amenity that's attached to all of these. So not just about attaching the riverfront north and south, it's about attaching the riverfront east and west, so that neighborhoods all along and in that crescent think about the riverfront as theirs, like that's part of our neighborhood, which I think could make everything more valuable and make the lives of people in those neighborhoods that have been, again, for years and years and years, decades, persistently poor, much better. Because again, a lot of those people, they're never going to get a vacation. This is their vacation on the riverfront. And that's a good, so I think of the riverfront as kind of, to say nothing of the education and the health and recreation options. So it's sort of a, like it has multiple dimensions of the investment that we make there, which is super, again, that's why it's so juicy to me, because it sort of hits on multiple levels. Yeah, we're building a park and parks, and we built 3 assets in 2 years, which I'm really proud of, but it just fires on a lot of cylinders here. And that's why, because here's the thing, in Memphis, no investment, we're a mid-sized city with limited funds. We got a high poverty rate. So every investment we make, it better be, 1 + 1 = 8. And that's hard to do. You got to make really careful choices. So I think that's another reason why the riverfront makes a lot of sense, because it's one of those things, it's an investment that is the gift that keeps on giving in multiple ways. So that's why it's important. And that's why it's important right now.
Well, the Tomley Park renovation has been in the news a lot, and people probably expected me to ask you about that. But I want to ask you about something that is, in a lot of ways, is equally impactful, maybe not in terms of overall dollars, but and that's the Fourth Bluff and the River Garden, and that initiative, that national initiative, is escaping me right now.
Reimagining the Civic Commons.
Yeah, the Civic Commons. Talk a little bit about that, because I think on a smaller scale geographically, it kind of shows you what Tomley Park can do on a much larger scale. And what you've done has been very successful. And then on the other end of it, talk about the Cossett Library, because I don't think a lot of people really know or are very aware of that renovation project. Yes.
Reimagining the Civic Commons is something that I birthed when I was at Knight Foundation. And we put together a coalition of foundations to invest in 5 cities across the country. And Memphis was one of them. I don't know why, but anyway, Memphis was part of the group of 5. And those foundations have brought resources and thought leadership to this work to think about, again, parks and libraries and trails and community centers and art centers to deliver, again, the obvious, but the question is, how do they deliver beyond the obvious? So create value in surrounding neighborhoods, in civic engagement, environmental sustainability, and one that is very close to my heart is socioeconomic mixing, which sounds so like, but it just really basically means mixing people of different demographics, different incomes, et cetera, in one place in one time. So we were fortunate enough in Memphis to put together 4 capital projects initially. Fourth Bluff Park, the old Confederate Park, River Garden, the old Jeff Davis Park, and a river line that connects, bike pedestrian trail that connects the entire riverfront, and the remake of Cossett Library, which is going to be so exciting. I mean, the physicality, right, of all of these is wonderful. I mean, the design, the execution, people love the spaces. But what's really exciting is the way people are now able to use the spaces. And when I think about Cosset, which probably will open, I think maybe early next year, but it's just the redo of the, not the original building, but the newer building. It's going to turn the library from a library to a real community asset for learning, for meeting, for gathering, for eating, for drinking, and with books still there. And I love the concept of Cosset, and I live a block from the Cosset, so I can't wait to make it, my indoor neighborhood place, just like the Riverfront is my outdoor neighborhood place. Shemichael who's running that project, has done so much work around getting just top quality people involved, like Little Buck, who's an internationally recognized Jukin dancer, and people in Memphis, are going to be teaching that. I can't wait in Cosset. So these are special spaces that and for us, it's great because we can take a small, one block piece of property at River Garden, and we can test everything we want to do and learn in small space for what we eventually do in the 31 acres in Tom Lee. So it makes us much more confident about the maintenance and the care of Tom Lee. And it's actually influencing the design in many ways too, because we know some things that don't work. We know some things where people have needs that we hadn't quite anticipated. So we're learning a lot in running those spaces.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Drive by. Often I'll come down Interstate 40 and get off at Riverside and come down Riverside up to Union to my office, my law office. And it's just, there's always somebody in that park. It may only be 2 or 3 people. Sometimes it's a whole lot more than that, but there's always somebody there. And before it was renovated, there was everybody in that park.
Nobody.
So it's anybody who asks me, well, what are they going to do with Tom Lee? I said, go look at River Garden. It's not going to be the same, but that shows you the difference that these kinds of projects can make.
Yeah, and we do park counts, Alan. We do park counts all through the, from the center section all the way down to Big River Crossing at points in the day. And it's been really interesting to see how the closing of Riverside Drive down adjacent to Tom Lee has been just hugely popular.
I knew you get a plug in for that.
Well, what can I say? Honestly, I would never have I would never have advocated going that far to close the road. You know that, because we talked about it. But honestly, the difference it makes and the joy people, that we surveyed lots of people in the park in Tom Lee. And now I'm distracted on this, but I'll tell you something really interesting. I did verbatims from all the interviews. Right. And we did a word cloud, right? Which words did they use? The number one word was peaceful. Mm-hmm. The second word was love. I thought, peace and love. This is great, for woohoo. Ding, ding, ding. So it's been really interesting just to see how people respond. But the park counts, back to that a minute. One thing that's interesting, as popular as Tom Lee has now become with Riverside Drive closed, we still see River Garden 10 times more intensively used per acre than Tom Lee. And I just think it shows you what the potential of that park really is once we make those improvements.
Well, let's come full circle. We started out in South Memphis, so let's end up in South Memphis. And talk about something that's near and dear to your heart and my heart, and I think it's I think it's part of the future of Memphis, and that's Martin Luther King Park, which a lot of people don't know about. And if they know about it, they certainly don't know how large it is. It's a huge park just west of Interstate 55 at South Parkway, and it borders the river. And you and I have talked about that for years, that could be at some point in the future, that could be a catalyst to help economic recovery in South Memphis.
Absolutely. It's funny how I know a lot of very well-connected native Memphians who say, I always wondered what all those trees were when I drove down I-55, over there on the west, and never knew there was a park there. In part, there's no signage there. The signage right there on the expressway tells you T.O. Fuller Park this way.
State Park, which is
a state park, right?
Which is south and kind of far away from southwest of there. Yeah.
That's right. And so it's interesting. I was over in MLK Park the other day. One reason is because the Corps of Engineers, based on an application we submitted when we first got here to the partnership, we submitted an application to the Corps of Engineers to help with a master plan for the park. And they all came in a couple of weeks ago, and we walked the park, which is, that'll make your day, walk the park. But it's an enormous asset. That was a farm that was bought at the same time the farm that is now Overton Park was bought. And then the parkway system connected, the river and the two farms that had been bought. And Overton Park, they stopped the expressway going through it. It has a conservancy. It's been invested in and lifted up, while MLK Park, originally called Riverside Park, has really, had an expressway, take the piece off on the east, and then, does not have a conservancy, hasn't had the uplift. And I just think it is a jewel in the making. There is forest, there's McKellar Lake, there's Treasure Island across from it. It's just it's got topography, yay, topography in flat Memphis. So it's a special place, incredible trees, and a golf course that is a 9-hole that is not irrigated. And, Pine Hills is close by. I know there's some people who love the golf course, and it's not up to me what to do with the golf course, but you can imagine it as a phenomenal festival grounds. So who knows what becomes of MLK Park. We're also, part of this Corps of Engineers study, Alan, is looking at the entrances. It's hard to find the entrance to that park. So, just some obvious things, and then some promotion we'd like to do. MLK is on every map we've put out on the riverfront, because we want people to find their way there, and we hope we're going to create a better bike link to from Big River Crossing and the sort of central part of the park north of I-55. And then we manage 2 of the parks now, Crump and Chickasaw Heritage, south of I-55. And then it's just a short jump to MLK. So that's a good one.
Yeah, I think it's real estate speculators. That's a very interesting place to look. Between those 2 parks in MLK, I kind of see a Gold Coast, like Chicago's Gold Coast of high rises and mixed use, and that could really bring back South Parkway as a great business commercial strip, and then that neighborhood, which is right there and connects to the park with some overpasses. It wouldn't take a lot to really bring that area back, and as you said before, make sure that we don't price it out for working people, but have a good demographic breakdown there. Really could be a fabulous, and I think that's probably be measured in decades rather than years when that's going to happen, because we got a lot of work to do north of of I-55. But I mention it because I'd like to put it on everybody's radar screen. Folks more creative than I am, how can we bring that park back and thus bring back that whole section of Memphis, which is, as you say, undervalued, underutilized, and has a lot of rich history of folks that grew up there.
It's got great housing stock. The house I lived in Longview Heights, it's a fieldstone house. The whole neighborhood's fieldstone. If you look around South Memphis, there's a lot of strength in the housing stock. A lot of it is like what's around Rhodes College.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's just in in a neighborhood that doesn't have the same value. I'll just put one other thing on the radar that's related. I think, if you look at coming off the expressway on 3rd, going north on 3rd, you can hit FedEx Forum, the new FedEx headquarters. You can hit Service Master. You can hit the Peabody, AutoZone Park, Indigo Ag. I mean, 3rd Street, if we looked at that as a new corridor into downtown, I think that's the other thing that could sort of flank. You have MLK, then you have 3rd Street, and then you have what goes straight through town. I can't think of a number, but the Medical Center Expressway, the expressway that goes from the airport straight up,
Oh, 240.
Yeah, 240. So you have, that could be another really strong corridor. And if you look at it, you got plenty of room on 3rd. It's a very wide street. And there are lots of opportunities for redevelopment in there. So, yeah, I agree with you. It just takes someone with real estate know-how and more imagination and the ability to really appreciate what that community is today and the people who are there, but also can be. So let's, maybe somebody, we know will take an interest. I don't know.
Well, Carol, that's about all the time we've got today, but here's what we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about Greenbelt Park. We didn't talk about Mud Island, really. We didn't talk about Tomley Park very much, or Martyrs Park, or any of those parks up that you mentioned around Interstate 55. So I hope you'll come back on the show and we'll talk about more on the riverfront sometime.
I'd love to. Thanks, Alan.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody watching. And we're going to close out for now. But thank you for watching. Thank you again, Carol. And I'm going to go back and try to get a little justice.